All right. Let's proceed with the introduction. I think, we have an image now. So this is Katja. She's also a colleague from the Cologne Game Lab, and she's there at CGL, program manager for the interdisciplinary MA Game Development and Research. She holds a joint master degree in German and comparative literature from both Rheinische Friedrich-Wilhelms Universität in Bonn, sorry, the University of Bonn, I guess, yeah, and St Andrews University in Scotland. She's a co-organizer of the Young Academics Workshop, an event that takes place also at GGL that's aimed at including early career researchers and designers in the academic world. And as a former literature scholar, she has a soft spot for narrative-heavy games and the so-called walking simulators. In 2020, she became a PhD candidate in media studies at the University of Cologne and the Cologne Game Lab, and her dissertation, The Narrative Capacity of Spaces and Objects in Walking Simulator Games, explores the connections and relationships between player narratives and in-game environments in walking simulators. So I think your talk is going to be very much related to that topic, so I'm looking forward to it. Let's welcome Katja, and yeah, we'll listen to her presentation.
All right. So thank you all for having me. I always talk about walking simulators, and so today is not going to be an exception, obviously. So this is my little talk title here. It's a bit long. It's called The Haunted Spaces in Between on the Structural Liminality of Walking Simulators. Sounds very complicated, and I only have 15 minutes or so, so I'm trying to basically cram in three different levels, I like to call it. So I will explore the concept of liminality, of course, in relation to walking simulators on those levels. The first level is liminality as a recurring theme on the diegetic level of some well-known walking simulators. The second level is liminality as a state of the gaming community in the 2010s. And third level is liminality as, well, a form of evolution in gaming and games production. So lots of topics for a 15-minute talk. All right, so very, very brief definition of the walking simulator. I think most people already know what the term walking simulator refers to. So the roots of the walking simulator, they are very experimental, and they go way back into the 1970s, actually. But the term walking simulator has appeared in online forums around 2012, because that was when the first official walking simulator, Dear Esther, was released. And we will be going into that discussion around Dear Esther later on. So walking simulators, they are slow games. They are not exciting in the way most other big games are. They are slow, and there is no winning, really, because you can't win a walking simulator in the same way that you can't win a visit to a museum or walk in the park, because they are not about winning or conquering or scoring points or optimization. And there is also not a lot of active player agency, which is the experimental part, I would say, about that genre compared to other more popular game genres. And also this term, walking simulator, this is actually, well, very misleading, because those games, they are not about a simulation of the physical act of walking. There are games that try to do that. QWOP is a very funny one. But walking simulators, they are about something else. So why do I still use this term? Because it is a derogatory term, actually. And it is also, well, very incorrect and misleading. I still use it because it has been reclaimed by players by now, and game developers as well, and it has turned into basically just the official term for this genre of experimental game. However, I would always like to note that there have been attempts to find a better name, a more fitting, more correct name for this genre, the walking simulator, such as ambience action game, for example, or narrative exploration game, and both of these terms are way better. But sometimes it is just like that. the old term is the one that sticks. So I'll be talking about walking simulators today. All right, let's go to level 1, the diegesis. So if walking sims are not about walking, what are they about? And what does that have to do with liminality? First of all, very quick definition. What do I mean when I refer to liminality? I refer to a period of transition marked by ambiguity, very important aspect, wherein individuals or communities undergo a transformative process. Another important term here. I have collected a few well-known walking simulators here on the next slide, and I've highlighted some of their main themes. And you can see, I don't know if the people online can see it, I'm not sure, but many of those main themes that I've collected here in those games, they center around some sort of liminality, especially emotional liminality. The first 3 games that we see here, What Remains of Edith Finch, Derrida and Firewatch, they deal with very complex emotions, with very ambiguous emotions, such as grief in Derrida and in Firewatch as well. Firewatch also deals with illness, with dementia. And What Remains of Edith Finch deals with finding one's own identity. And What Remains of Edith Finch also deals with finding this identity in the liminal space of fiction and reality, of a family history, a very, very complicated family history. And then there are those walking simulators that have no fixed storyline and only encourage the player to aimlessly wander in a, liminal environment to soak up the atmosphere. For example, the example I have here is It's Winter, where you wander around at night through a block of flats, basically, somewhere in Russia, and nothing is really happening, but it's still very atmospheric. It's a very nice experience. And also Proteus is one of those games. You can play it here if it works. I hope it does. So also with most of those games, there is a big overlap with the Freudian uncanny. And I wrote an entire paper about this topic. It's open access, so feel free to read it, because I don't have the time to go into the whole idea of the uncanny now, unfortunately. But the very short version is the liminal and the uncanny, they have something in common, because they both evoke feelings of uncertainty in us. And the uncanny means that the familiar becomes strange, but not with a bang, very suddenly, but very, very slowly. The uncanny creeps in. It's a creeping defamiliarization of the familiar. And that causes a feeling of uncertainty in it. And walking simulators they tend to be very uncanny, even if they are not about literal ghosts. And also in walking simulators, there is a consistent persistence of the past in the present. And this is what we usually call a haunting. And if you play some of those walking sims, you may notice that many of them feature different forms of hauntings. Those hauntings can range from artifacts that we have to explore, to memories that we have to read, for example, in letters or books or journals, also to ideas from the past that the protagonist has to deal with in their presence. And sometimes there are also literal ghosts in walking simulators, such as in the prototype walking simulator Derrida. So this was the diegesis. Now let's move on to the second level, to the cultural discourse, which is quite interesting when it comes to walking sims. So speaking of hauntings, there is a certain discourse that has haunted the walking simulator for basically a decade now. And this is the question, are those really games? And in my opinion, this discourse is a manifestation of also a certain liminality, and liminality of gaming culture, in big air quotes right here, especially during the 2010s. What do I mean by that? So, looking back at the debate that surrounded the walking simulator in the 2010s, it sure is interesting, especially from today's perspective, because many people were, well, quite angry about walking simulators when they first came out. And here you can see some earlier reviews of Derrida. Some of them were positive, many of them were also negative. You can see that there is a red thumb down for a negative review. Yeah, and also I included a review about, or a thread on Steam about another game, Call of Cthulhu, a newer game. And yeah, the question that this person is asking is this a walking simulator or an actual game? Yeah, well. So, why were people so divided about a handful of, at the time, experimental games? Because the walking simulator undermined what many people who called themselves gamers defined as a game. And it also challenged the label gamer as a form of identity. In the 2010s, well, gamers were mostly teenagers or young adults, usually men. And often those men were white or Asian, and usually they had a competitive streak. Nothing wrong with that, but that was the cliché of a gamer in the 2010s. So walking simulators have very simple mechanics, and they have a short playtime. And as I said, player agency is relatively low. Anybody can play them, and it only takes around 3 to 7 hours to complete a walking simulator. So not a big time commitment. You can do that in a day or a weekend. Yeah, and that accessibility, that challenged the identity of those core gamers at the time, because if the boring and mechanically accessible walking simulator was a real game, then anybody who played it could call themselves a gamer. And that subverted the whole definition of gamers that most people had during the 2010s. And yeah, it did not help the critics that Derrida and its predecessors were actually quite popular at the time, even in the beginning. It was not just criticism. Lots of people loved those games. So slowly but surely, uncannily, if you want to call it that, games and game discourse started to change after the success of those first walking simulators. And in this way, the 2010s can be viewed as a liminal stage of the medium game. There was a transformation happening in those years. And where, yeah, in this time, the game as a medium really started to become a medium that appealed to the masses and not just to, again, air quotes, nerdy men and teenage boys. So this brings us to the very last level, to games production. So the liminality that I would like to discuss in this context is, yeah, the liminality of games production. So in the beginning, I defined liminality as a period of transition marked by ambiguity that starts a transformative process. And we can see such a slow transformation in the player base of walking sims, but also when we have a look at the people who develop them and who create them. So the thing is, walking simulators are relatively easy and relatively cheap to make compared to AAA games. And as I said, they are very accessible to play. And yeah, the result of this accessibility is that they can be created, played, and enjoyed by all sorts of people. Gaming has become more diverse through walking simulators. At least this is my take on it. So the result of this shift is that we can get to experience stories that are a bit more quiet, maybe, a bit more personal than the traditional epic plot in which the hero saves the world from destruction. And walking simulators also often tell stories about complex and ambiguous emotions. They also give us, the players, space for introspection, especially when we get the chance to just wander around a beautiful or atmospheric landscape. They give us time and they give us space to feel. And Emotions and emotional experiences, this should be clear by now, I hope, play a fundamental role in how walking simulators work. And I would argue that they can be viewed as one of the main mechanics of the genre. Walking simulators are not about walking, they are about feeling. Which is why I think that the success of walking sims has played a part in what I call the emotional term. This term is not stolen, borrowed from the social sciences. And in the social sciences, the emotional turn refers to a growing awareness of the role of emotionality in understanding social relationships and experience, both for those who live them firsthand and for the researchers who study them. So, why emotional turn? Because our understanding of what makes a good game has changed over time. And I think walking simulators have championed this change in a way. Because now, if you look at those 3 little examples that I brought, Red Dead Redemption 2, Death Stranding, and Stray, you can see that AAA games have adapted what walking simulators have done from the very beginning. As it's always the case, the indies do it first, and then AAA, the mainstream, takes it and combines it with their games. And those are very big budget games, and all of them have walking simulator mechanics. So basically that was my little talk. Here are some of the main points for you to take home. And I think the floor is now open to questions.
Yeah, thank you. Awesome.
Thank you.
We have a little time for questions. Oh, we see a couple of hands. So let's go. So your hand raising a little bit earlier.
You started. You take this question. Is this a game? And you said, well, it is, if I understand you correctly. Mm-hmm. This may be a little bit provocative, but when we discuss in early game studies classes what a game is, we have all these definitions from you to Salen and Zimmerman. And how would you take those definitions, which specifically define a winning stake and so on and so on? How should we challenge those definitions when we discuss the question of what a game is in terms of walking simulators? And in relationship to the AAA games, how do you feel about the player walking simulator videos of AAA games like Cyberpunk? You walk in Night City and you broadcast it on YouTube and so on. Those kind of activities, what's your take on those type of activities? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Wonderful question and a hard one to answer. And to be frank with you here, this is a question where I am still not sure what my stance is, because it is complex. As you said, there are several definitions of what a game is. And right now, at this time in my life, I say, yes, walking simulators are games. Because, first of all, due to their history. If we go to Derrida, then Derrida was a modification of Half-Life 2. A first-person shooter, one of the classic game genres, right? And one of the game genres that is very close to this whole identity of what a gamer used to be. And I think this is one of the reasons why people got so emotional over it, because Derrida took the first-person shooter and stripped it of everything except walking. So I like to go with the definition for walking simulators. They are code-based and they are interactive. And in my opinion, right now, this makes them games. Experimental games, definitely, but if you go to the idea of ludus and paideia, paideia is what children do when they play pretend. They don't play to win. It's still a game. It's just a different form of game. And I hope this answers my perspective on the first question, but this is lunch break talk right here, to be honest. And the second question was about people who basically create movies from walking simulators, what my stance is. Well, honestly, I think that it's very practical for me as a researcher because I can just watch those videos. It's fine, but I think it still takes away a bit of the experience because walking simulators are made to be played, which makes them games, again, I would say. So yeah, thank you for that question.
Thank you. That was really interesting. I liked what you were saying about the liminal status of the player. I was curious to know, I mean, I don't know if you're interested in that cross-disciplinary relationship, but I was curious to know if you'd thought much about the actual politics of walking, because there's a very rich study of this in cultural geography. So from things like the phenomenology of landscape from walking perspectives, there's a lot to do with walking as a way of opening up histories in the landscape, but also the kind of radicalism of walking. So the figure of something like the flaneur, which is this kind of counter behavior where, kind of in a similar way to what you're saying, it's not being in the landscape the way it's supposed to work, which is kind of task-driven or driven by productivity or winning, is deliberately unproductive, and it's therefore countercultural, counter-capitalist. So I wondered if that kind of feeds into your thinking.
It does, very much so. There are several wonderful papers about that, and one paper is, I think, Rosa Carbo-Mascarell. She wrote about romanticism, walking simulators as a romantic practice. And she goes into depth with such, well, basically walking as a political movement. Dérivé is what she has a look at. So yeah, this is definitely something that I have thought about, and other people have thought about it as well, way more in depth. And yes, counterculture, definitely. And I think this counterculture argument, this subversive part of the walking simulator, that can also be seen in this debate during the 2010s. It's basically the same thing. Walking simulators are not productive because they don't want to be. And this makes some people uncomfortable. So it's not new.
All right, thank you very much, Katja. Very, very interesting discussion and presentation. We're moving on to, the last.